Welcome back. You're watching The Last Sip. After experiencing the pain and trauma of sexual assault, how do we heal? Well, our next guest argues that breaking the silence and holding those responsible through love with accountability is the answer. Here joining me now is Aishah Shahidah Simmons, an award-winning filmmaker, lecturer, professor, and activist whose #Love with Accountability is an online forum which prioritizes healing and justice for survivors. First off, Aishah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I actually, when I was reading all of the things that you do in life, I thought that like Shirley Caesar had written it. I didn't know what was next. If you had beans, greens, tomatoes, I actually had to cut some of it out. You're a professor. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
First off, can you talk about healing and your assessment of the role of accountability in healing as something that actually came up through your own journey in recovering from sexual assault and sexual violence?
Yes, well, I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse and adult rape. So for many years, my work focused on adult rape through my film, Know the Rape documentary. But then I started really beginning to dig and pull up the roots of sexual violence in my life, which is child sexual abuse. And my project is Love with Accountability, which really looks at how accountability is a radical form of love needed to end, all forms of sexual violence, but Love with Accountability is very child sexual abuse specific. Engaging with adult survivors of child sexual abuse and looking at mechanisms and how we can address this pandemic through models of love and accountability outside of the very punitive criminal justice system.
Mm-hmm. What is accountability to you, and why is it radical love?
So accountability is really naming the harm that you've done and really being able to engage with the person if they want to be engaged, right? The person who's experienced harm, to engage with them, to really name it. Because I think for so many of us, it's important that what has happened has been named by the person because who's caused the harm, or people who've caused the harm, because we're all constantly told that we're lying, that we're crazy, that we're making up things. So that, particularly if you're a child, you can start like wondering, well, did it happen to me, or is it happening to me while it's happening? So for the harm doer to be able to name it, it can be a seismic experience. I told when I was 10 years old, when it was happening, and it happened for 2 years. I told both of my parents, and they didn't do anything to take me out of the situation. So there's definitely what my grandfather did, right? That was, the really just terrorism for 2 years, not knowing when it was going to happen. But then also my parents who didn't address it at the time. Right. So it's multi-layered. And then, as is the case with so many of us who are survivors, that we then have to engage with the person who caused us harm. So let me be very clear. I loved my grandfather deeply and dearly, and I also feared him.
You mentioned in Color Lines in a quote that you gave about Bill Cosby, and you were speaking about Bill Cosby. And one of the things that it's interesting because for Black women, for Black people, they're more likely to experience sexual assault and sexual violence at the hands of someone that they know. And of course, Bill Cosby was America's dad, right? Supposedly, he was the person that everyone looked up to. What do you think are some of the first steps in healing when you experience that sense of betrayal and hurt and harm from people that are close to you?
Yeah, I think the first steps is being able to hopefully find someone who is your advocate, meaning someone who you can talk to about what's happened.
In my own case, that the minute that I was able to actually articulate what happened, it lost its power over me in some really substantial ways. So I think that, as you say, that like talking about what happened and not remaining silent is key, because what we always have is our own voice that's not dependent on someone else, right? And so if we have the courage to exercise that could be one of the first steps, as you kind of just laid out. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for your work and for the persistence that you've had in continuing to find new ways to explore and to bring the issue of healing and sexual assault and childhood sexual abuse to women.
No, I just wanted to say, like, my work is my CSA, my child sexual abuse work, is focusing on humans, and it's really important because definitely women and girls are impacted, but boys, gender queer, gender non-binary folks are impacted. And it's really important for me that we broaden the discussion to include all of us who've been harmed. My goal is to end sexual violence against all humans.
That's exactly right. And I mean, I think that the other thing is that, particularly with gender identity and as gender identity changes, you may not necessarily remain in the same gender that you were assigned as birth, but those experiences and that trauma carries forth. And so broadening out who we talk about and how we talk about is really, really important
Exactly.
in sexual
Thank you.
violence. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us and for all of your work on this issue and for everything that you've done to continue to highlight the issues of sexual assault and sexual violence amongst humans. As you said, let's be sure to emphasize that. For more information about ways to heal, #LoveWithAccountability and Aishah's work, visit www.thelastSip.org and click on How to Help. We'll be right back.